All right, let's go ahead. Let's take a look at another video today. Let's do another reaction. Today we're taking a look at Simple Histories, how corrupt politicians used to be punished. And there is a lot of interest in that, I'm sure, for people. There have been myriad number of ways that individuals have been punished or dealt with for crimes and actions throughout history. I mean, that list is incredibly extensive, and even just within the same country, there can be many, many, many different ways that someone may be punished for a crime. But there is typically something unique and special when it comes to the punishment, when it comes to politicians, because they are the ones that we entrust the running of the nation, the running of our communities to. And so when they betray the trust, there's a certain there's a certain extra piece to that crime that I'm sure that people have throughout history taken special umbrage with, that they would do something like that. So let's go ahead and take a look at what they've got for us today. That did not work like I thought it would.
The word defenestrate.
And they've immediately said one of my favorite words, which is defenestrate, which is to throw or push someone out of a window, which is itself kind of an insane thought process, that it is a common enough occurrence that it requires its own word. And even beyond that, to realize that there have been multiple defenestrations of historic note, like the defenestrations of Prague. The second one having sparked the first actions of the 30 Years' War. So let's go ahead and take a look at where this is going.
Sounds almost whimsical, until you remember it means to throw someone out of a window.
No, it's still pretty whimsical. It's still pretty fun. It doesn't really matter the ultimate context. I find that a very whimsical term.
Anywhere with glass and gravity could see such a fate, but Prague, the fairy tale city of spires, seems uniquely
I might have jumped ahead. I didn't know that I was jumping ahead, but I have, apparently.
Tied to this deadly tradition. Over centuries, windows in this city have been portals, not just to the streets below, but to revolutions, wars, and mysteries that changed the course of European history. The first plunge, 1419. Our story begins in the early 15th century. Picture Bohemia, then a jewel of the Holy Roman Empire, but a kingdom seething with religious discord.
Yeah, we're already kind of in a major series of conflicts between the rising Protestant powers and Protestant princes and Protestant masses against the Catholic kingdoms and ruling forces of the region. So we've got a pretty big problem moving up rather quickly. And that's going to ultimately culminate in the 30 Years' War later on with the second defenestration. But I don't know nearly as much about the first defenestration of Prague. So let's see where this goes.
It's before Martin Luther ever nailed his thesis to a church door. A Czech theologian named Jan Hus was already challenging the might of Rome. He condemned the sale of indulgences, those costly certificates that promised forgiveness of sins and a shorter stay in purgatory.
Which is a major thing that Martin Luther is going to disparage and go against when he does his theses against the Catholic Church. I believe that Jan Hus is an inspiration for what Martin Luther ends up doing. I could be misremembering that, but there are a lot of very prominent theologians across Europe who are very much so anti-indulgence, anti-corruption within the church, and are, I don't want to say not afraid to speak their mind, because many of them still end up dead, but are willing to risk that, to call out what they see as wrong within the church.
He insisted the Bible should be read in Czech, not cloistered away in Latin.
Which is something that Martin Luther is going to eventually preach, except he says that it should be preached in German, because he's in the German states of the Holy Roman Empire.
And he demanded that the clergy reform itself, stripping away the corruption and wealth that alienated ordinary believers.
Yep.
These teachings spread like wildfire among a Czech population hungry for change. But to the church authorities, Hus was a dangerous spark. In 1411, he was excommunicated. When he was lured to the Council of Constance in 1414, promised safe passage to defend his views, he instead found himself in chains. He was declared a heretic, and in 1415, burned alive. His death did not snuff out his ideas.
Arguably, it enraged the Hussites, the individuals who followed him, to a massive degree. There's something incredibly motivating for organizations throughout history to now have a martyr. And that's what's created when John Hus is killed by the church and its supporters. Suddenly, now they have a martyr who will be the face of that fight, that revolt, that revolution, which is not an easy position to be in for whoever you're going against.
It turned him into a martyr. His followers, known as the Hussites, seethed as tensions escalated in a kingdom already fractured by...
I really need to stop doing that. I need to let them finish their thought, because I clearly am just stepping over what's being discussed.
Competing popes and papal politics. By July 1419, Prague was a tinderbox. On the 30th of that month, Hussite priest Jan Jalewski led a furious crowd to Prague's new town hall. Their demand? The release of imprisoned comrades. What happened next depends on which chronicler you believe. Maybe stones were thrown from the windows, maybe insults provoked the crowd. Either way, something snapped. The mob surged into the hall. Moments later, Prague's burgomaster, a judge, and several council members were seized and hurled from the upper windows onto the cobblestones below. Most died on impact. Survivors were beaten to death by the mob waiting outside. This was no isolated act of violence. This was the spark that ignited the Hussite Wars, a brutal conflict that raged across Bohemia for 17 years, reshaping the religious and political landscape of Central Europe. The forgotten.
That is a really big deal, because to have a long-term shift, a long-term change in the religious makeup of the region makes it even more primed to reignite that fervor, to go further with it when we actually see the broader Protestant Reformation pop up under Martin Luther. All right, so we've got another one. This one is clearly not the second defenestration. Is this whole video about defenestrations? Did I effectively get an early present? Because I love this. This is awesome. Let's go.
Fall, 1483.
Not where I'm going. All right. So where's this one going? But that's where we go back to that the actual town officials were the ones being thrown for the windows in that case, because they were backing and supporting the church and against the Hussite mob or organized group that was going after them during this period.
Fast forward 6 decades, the Hussite Wars had ended, and a fragile peace emerged between the moderate Hussites, called Utraquists, after their belief in communion under both kinds, and the Catholic nobility. On paper, it was a partnership. In reality, mistrust festered.
And this is something that we've noticed, that you'll notice a lot with European history throughout the 1415 and into the 1600s even. There is a lot of religious turmoil and a lot of religious infighting. Just look at France and the wars of religion there between the Huguenots and the Protestant Huguenots and the actual Catholic Church that the monarchy is centered on. Of the eventual breakaway of England from the Catholic Church to the Anglican Church for a variety of reasons. A big one being that Henry VIII couldn't keep to a wife. Besides the point. That's the point. And there are numerous conflicts throughout the Holy Roman Empire for decades around religious turmoil and conflict there. So this is during a very common period of rapid upheaval among them. Even if you go out west to Spain, while Protestantism isn't huge there, the Spanish kingdoms, Castile, Leon, the other Aragon, are all fighting to remove the Muslim Moors in Andalus from control over the Iberian Peninsula that they had conquered all the way back in, I think, the 700. No, it was later. I think it was the 800s, maybe even the 900s. But that's still going on in the 1400s as well. So religious conflict is a very common reality across Europe during this period.
Catholics whispered about heresy. Hussites feared purges. In September of 1483, rumors swirled that the Catholic leadership planned to strike first, cleansing Hussites from positions of influence. The Utrechists decided to act preemptively. On the night of September 24th, mobs stormed the old and new town halls. History repeated itself. Councillors were seized and flung from the windows into the dark. By dawn, the Hussites controlled Prague. Their coup successful. Unlike the first defenestration, this one didn't trigger a war. Negotiations followed and an uneasy balance returned. But because it lacked the fiery aftermath of its predecessor, this episode often slips through the cracks of history, an overlooked rehearsal for future turmoil.
I did not know about that one, which makes sense. They are literally calling it the Forgotten Fall. But also, it's not that surprising that we're seeing this internal kind of debate and discussion as to whether or not they trust one another. It's not uncommon for there to be these deals made and then pretty quickly to be gone back on. France has one of the most infamous cases, the St. Bartholomew Days massacre, where Huguenots are ostensibly welcomed into Paris for the wedding of Henry of Navarre, a Huguenot, and I don't remember his wife's name, but she was the daughter of the former king. She was a princess that was Catholic. It was supposed to be a wedding that would basically stop. It's a political marriage that would stop the major conflicts. Henry of Navarre actually converts to Catholicism to go through with it. I believe that he very famously says Paris is well worth a mass, but what ends up happening is the Huguenots inside the city are slaughtered, and that sparks a broader series of violence against the Huguenots. It seemed like the religious wars were finally coming to an end, and instead they ramp up and become even worse. So it is fairly nice that this ultimately comes out to this. I'd also like to point out it's a little problematic for me to be laughing at the ultimate deaths of individuals that are thrown out of these windows. But A, it's a cartoon. In this case, it's presented through a cartoon manner. B, somebody getting thrown out of a window is still kind of objectively funny. And C, what's the fun in the world if we can't poke jokes at the funnier bits of history and reality?
The Fall heard across Europe, 1618.
This is the second piece.
Now, we come to the most famous defenestration of them all, the one that sent shockwaves through an entire continent.
Yes.
By the early 17th century, Europe was still reeling from the Protestant Reformation. The Kingdom of Bohemia had achieved a kind of religious détente. Protestants and Catholics shared power, their rights secured by the Letter of Majesty issued in 1609. Then came Ferdinand II, a staunch Catholic who ascended the Bohemian throne in 1617. Ferdinand ignored the letter of majesty. Protestant churches were shuttered. Rights were stripped away. It was tinderbox time again. On May 23, 1618, Protestant nobles marched to Hradčany Castle to confront two royal governors, Jaroslav Borita of Martinez and Vilém Slavata. Their secretary, Philip Fabricius, was also present. The nobles demanded answers about their violated freedoms. Tempers flared. And then, as if scripted by fate itself, history repeated its grim choreography. Martinez was seized, dragged to a window, and tossed headlong into the void. Slavata followed, clawing desperately at the frame until his hand was struck loose. Fabricius, guilty of only being there, was hurled out next. Three men plummeted from a dizzying height and somehow lived. Protestants claimed they landed in a manure pile. Catholics insisted angels broke their fall. Whatever the truth.
I've also read that while it was a rather high fall, the architecture of the building kind of started to slope down and out not too far away. So that curvature would have also broken the fall. But yeah, you can already see the basis for religious conflict. The Catholics saying, oh, they were saved by God. Now they have a very strong case for, well, we're going to go fight. And we are going to beat the Protestants in this case. Meanwhile, the Protestants spreading statements that they landed in a large pile of manure, or that's a pretty good jab at the overlords that are trying to limit their freedoms in Bohemia. I find it very fun, but it's a debate that we'll probably never know the actual answer to how exactly they survived, because sometimes people just survive things that they shouldn't. The downward slope is probably the most realistic. But that's beside the point.
They survived. Fabricius even earned the ironic title von Hohenfall, meaning of the high fall. But the survival of those men didn't prevent catastrophe. This act ignited the Bohemian Revolt, which spiraled into the 30 Years' War, one of the most destructive conflicts in European history. Armies ravaged the continent. Entire regions were depopulated. In terms of sheer percentage of lives lost, it remains the deadliest war in German history. The war finally ended in 1648 with the Treaty of Westphalia. This treaty didn't just bring peace, it redrew borders and cemented the concept of the sovereign nation-state, the framework that still shapes global politics today. The last shadow.
Oh. We'll let him hang in the air for a second. But, yeah, the 30 Years' War is incredibly destructive. Whole sections of Germany are destroyed. The looting and destruction that armies do is immense during this period. And this is also a period where Germany is not unified. We've got dozens of different principalities and smaller duchies and areas that are all vying for control. And all vying for success. And what that ultimately does is lead to everything getting worse. If a neighboring state sides with the opposing group, suddenly there are many, many, many different smaller conflicts all across the country. You drag in outside forces. France gets involved. Sweden gets involved. All of these different powers are incredibly centered in what's happening here. And ultimately, it is kind of the shift, the changing point. I believe that the Treaty of Westphalia also is what gives the Netherlands their independence from Spain. I could be completely misremembering that, but I believe that it is. Give me a second, actually. We'll double check that. Oh, this is a different piece. 80 Years' War. 1648. Yep. All right. Yeah, that would be the Treaty of Westphalia. in 1648. All right. So yeah, one of the major players in the kind of colonial age and the trade wars that are happening there comes out of and finally gains their independence out of that war.
Fall, 1948. For centuries, Prague's windows seemed to whisper of faith and power, but in the 20th century, they became entwined with ideology and espionage. On the morning of March 10, 1948, the body of Jan Masaryk, the foreign minister of Czechoslovakia, was found beneath the window of the foreign ministry. Just weeks earlier, President Edvard Beneš had urged him to remain in office, despite a communist takeover of the government. Masaryk agreed. The official story claimed suicide, or perhaps an accident, but few believed it. Even under the heavy curtain of Soviet influence, whispers of foul play persisted. After the communist regime collapsed, new investigations followed in 2004, 2019, and 2025. Each dug deeper into that night. Masaryk's valet recounted seeing 3 men arrive late in the evening. Through the door, he heard Masaryk's voice. "I will not do this for you. I will sign everything, but not this. I will do everything. But this can happen only over my dead body." Shouting continued for an hour. At 11:45 p.m., the valet was dismissed, the last person known to see Masaryk alive. Who were those men? What did they demand? We may never know. But today, most historians agree, Masaryk did not jump. He was pushed. Stroll through Prague today, and you'll be enchanted.
I believe 100% that makes perfect sense that he was ultimately pushed. The Soviets were very, very heavy-handed in their efforts to control Eastern Europe and the communist bloc during the Cold War. There's no doubt in my mind that they would be willing to push a foreign minister out of a window to get something done, to get a job done that they wanted. Of course, it could have also not been the Soviets themselves. There are plenty of organizations amongst the different communist factions that control those Eastern European states, the Poles, Eastern Germany, Czechoslovakia, Romania. All those have their own secret police, their own structure that kept things in line for them during this period. So it does not surprise me at all that he was probably pushed.
Enchanted by its Gothic churches, its pastel Baroque facades, its skyline bristling with spires. You'd never guess how many windows here have witnessed history's turning points. But as the cobblestones whisper their secrets, one lesson lingers. Prague's windows are much more than just architectural features. They're thresholds where power, faith, and politics have collided, sometimes violently, leaving ripples that still shape our world. So by all means, enjoy the view. Just keep a safe distance from the edge.
I love it. I feel like they should have just called it a brief history of defenestrations, because I feel like anybody who actually knows defenestrations would have clicked on that immediately. I loved that so much. I really do love a good broken window in this manner. Super fun time. Let me know what I should react to next, and I'll see you in the next video. Have a great day. Bye.